morning to all of you. We really going up to more the northern side of Africa, but matter of terrorism is not new, and even ideologies that we're thinking sometimes that ISIS or Boko Haram invented terrorism. That is not true, neither from ideological point of view nor from operative point of view. So just to tell you that you really put emphasis on Boko Haram, but we know that 18th century, 19th century, northern East Nigeria, we have Ottoman Danfodio with Jihad movements and so on. So Islam and terrorism and Jihad is not totally new in Africa and also elsewhere, which I concentrate later. The issue that we're facing now in the new world is a changing world, not only on Africa, but on the entire world. The big technology changes, the globalization, are making processes faster. Now, what we've witnessed a few hundreds of years before, it's not necessarily, it's the same rhythm of what's going on today. Now, I would put emphasis not only on terrorist group, but on governments' response or dealing with that, even in terms of definition, what is terrorism from their point of view, and from that we can see how operates and deeds derives from that decisions, which in a very different arenas, the Egyptian one and the Sudanese one. Now, in spite of the fact that they sharing the Nile Valley, the way they look in the last 3 and more decades toward terrorism is very different, both in Egypt and the Sudan. It's coming back to issue of borders and identities, because if we're talking about the area of Sudan and South Sudan in Africa, bordering countries like Somalia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, and so on, or the Republic of Central Africa, you can see the combinations that you mentioned in the end of your presentation of Christian and Muslims, and for many years living together, but the tensions that arose in the last few years, in the last few decades, Shabab in Somalia, Boko Haram coming from Nigeria, ISIS with all kind of formats, Al-Qaeda, and so on. And besides, if you want to take it from the north, you can see what happened in the last few years in Libya, and went all the way west to Mali, back to Libya, and what it's going and doing to the entire area in the northern and Horn of Africa governments and inhabitants. Now, Egypt decided to define, from the time that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi came to power, to define terrorism, all groups that belongs to those who sit in the security of Egypt. That means Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, ISIS, Salafis, Boko Haram, Shabab, Al-Islamic Jihad, whoever in the eyes of the Egyptian leadership considered as the source, the ideological source, and Muslim source of terrorism. You're probably aware to the fact that from the mid-70s, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt itself became more and more extreme till the point that they defined other Muslim as somebody, we're talking about Anwar Sadat, who is somebody who endangers Egypt and Islam, and in spite of the fact that he himself, an Arab and Muslim leader of the biggest Arab country and Muslim country in that part of the Middle East, he can consider as somebody infidel that he can be killed by jihad. That's a matter of interpretation of ideology within Islam. From that point on, till he was assassinated in 1981, the Muslim Brotherhood became more and more extreme and made to factions like Takfir wa Hijra and some other factions that derive from the Muslim Brotherhood. And later on, in the era of beginning of globalization, some of the leaders moved to make it more global jihad, moved to Saudi Arabia and later on to Afghanistan and created Al-Qaeda. In the eyes of the Egyptian leadership, they are threatened from Libya, 2,000 kilometers of common border with Egypt, which is no fence, open. They have threatened from Sudan and also from Sinai. So in terms of looking at the threat from all sides, the Egyptian government are bothered from the fact that not only they have to deal with Muslim Brotherhood within, but they have to take care about Hamas from Sinai in a different time with a different way of working. They have ISIS in Sinai, they have ISIS in Libya, and more of that, there's a local and conjectural cooperation between those organizations, sometimes with other local families and tribes within Sinai or in Libya, and they have to find the way to deal with that in a most efficient way, which is, as you said correctly, very complicated. Now, it also derives from the way the government deal with the population, not necessarily with terrorist groups. For example, the way the Egyptian handles the population in Sinai, the Bedouin tribes in Sinai. That reflects directly on the way that if Bedouins economically, in terms of jobs and so on, are happy or not, and how much they would like to cooperate with terrorist groups like ISIS in Sinai, or if Hamas creating troubles and working together with the Muslim Brotherhood within Egypt, not only in Gaza Strip, how the Egyptian government take care of that. That's complicated because it's well known that Hamas was the one who actually released Mohammed Morsi from jail before he came to power. Now, how you attack that? Now, if in the time the phenomenon was there before, in the time of Mubarak, he fought the Muslim Brotherhood, but not with declaration like the current Egyptian government does. He had to do everything in order to fight terrorism of Muslim Brotherhood, but he didn't declare so clearly that it is dangerous for the national security of Egypt, like Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is doing today. That's very important. Once you decide to define your goal, it's easier to work against it, to put budget for it, and to persuade the government and the population that those terrorist groups are enemies. Now, when you are, and at least two of us happen to serve in Egypt in the last few years, and we can see clearly that the population in Egypt, that mostly is Muslim, I said, okay, in the past, Muslim Brotherhood was a faction, a part of our society. We disagreed with their terrorism and so on, but they were part of the society. But in 2014, 15, 16, when they have terrorist attacks with the tram in Cairo, in 5 places, and killed innocent people, Egyptians were angry, said, if you want to have a problem against government, we can accept it. But if you do it against citizens like us, we are not less Muslims than you. Why do you do it to us? That means that terrorism is not effective on us, and that issue, the government of Egypt trying to educate the population that the enemy is the enemy of the entire Egyptian society, which is important to understand that. Now, when you have a complexity, when you have, if we're talking about borders and identities, and some of the terrorist attacks coming from outside, like, for example, from Libya, how do you deal with the terrorist attacks from Libya? Are you going to cooperate with somebody in Libya? With whom? That is anybody can tackle terrorism in Libya? Haftar is the address, or other militia, or European Union, or Italy, or France? That's a problem. You need to think about it all the time when your border is open. In Sinai, there's no secret that the Egyptian government cooperating with us, not only against Hamas, but also it's a cooperation with ISIS and so on. So Egypt determined and knows what it's supposed to do regarding to terrorism. Sudan, on the southern side of the Nile Valley, it's a different story. Sudan has an ideology that in the last, from 89, actually changed and became more and more radical, not only in terms of belief or religion, but also with cooperating with terrorist groups. It's not a secret that bin Laden will stay 2 years or more in Sudan under the auspice of Bashir and Turabi at the time, and most of Al-Qaeda members got diplomatic passports from the Sudanese government. It started with cooperation with Shiite after the Shiite revolution in Iran in 79, the cooperation that Iran thought that Sudan will be the gate of trying to bring Shiite Islam into Africa in a big measures, and Sudan adopted by the time very radical ideology that was cooperating very, very bluntly with terrorism. That's why it was came into the list of terrorist countries that giving shelter to terrorism, and specifically the cooperation with bin Laden that had bombed 2 American embassies in Tanzania and in Kenya in '98, and also the idea that Sudan and Egypt are not cooperating anymore from that regime, while Egypt tried to fight terrorism, as I mentioned before, in the era of Mubarak. Sudan cooperated with bin Laden and challenged Egypt, and Mubarak pointed out very, very bluntly on Turabi and Bashir in '95 in an attempt of assassination of Mubarak in Ethiopia when he visited Ethiopia in '95, and ever since the relationship between those two regimes became very tense. And that is very important to understand, because the Nile is very vital interest of Egypt, that therefore the special relation for many, many generations between Egypt and the Sudan. Now, at the time of Bashir and Turabi, it changed dramatically. Now, Bashir got a lot of experience to work with terrorism, to cooperate with terrorism. That is very important, because when you know the leaders of terrorist groups, Al-Shabaab, for example, ISIS, and so on, and even I heard he had some connection to Boko Haram, which I'm not sure, but I heard about that. So that means when you mention in the end of your presentation the issue of immigration, which is a big issue in Africa, it reminds me the time when Gaddafi was in power, and he had troubles with Italy many times, and he said, I'm going to flood you with immigrants. Immediately Italy gave him a lot of money in order to stop that wave of immigration. Very similar to what's going on today with Merkel and Erdogan in Turkey, that he got billions of dollars in order to prevent immigration from Syria to Europe. And that's a way that actually Gaddafi could control the immigration from Libya to Italy. Now, which today we can see in Libya as well, so many immigrants coming from Africa to Libya, and then they stuck there in a very bad conditions in their attempt to get out from Libya to the Mediterranean. That is a big issue that also connected to terrorism. So we need to see the whole structure of it, how it reflects on that. Now, saying that Bashir was involved very heavily with terrorism, that means that he could talk with some of the leaders of Shabab, for example, and say, please, I'll let you do whatever you do in a specific issue, but please don't do that in that time, in that place, because that serves my interest. And he could maneuver with those terrorist organizations. If you can see the map, it's very easy to move from, even from Yemen, if ISIS would like to cross to Somalia or Shabab, to cross from Sudan to Libya and enable them to work there. If you would like to evoke the situation with Egypt, very easily to come from south through Nuba into Egypt and to create instability. So in that sense, I would say that Bashir could control the movement or the stream of terrorism, and that enabled him an ability to come to Western countries and say, you see, I'm stable, I can control, you need me for immigration and for war against terrorism. It's not a secret that September 11th, 2001, Bashir said, I'm fighting with you against terrorism. I'm changing the line and I'm doing it. And not surprisingly, many countries, European countries, in the last few years considered Bashir as stabilizing that part of Africa because his control and his ability to work with terrorist groups. That's very important to understand. Now, as a devotion of Egyptians to fight terrorism is very high, it still cannot prevent totally any attempt of terrorist attack. It happens either by ISIS or by Muslim Brotherhood. Border with Libya is not totally controlled. In Sudan, from last April, we have change of the regime that nobody knows where it's going to lead to. The attempt is to create a situation of a different regime, both from domestic point of view, more right to the population, less involvement in their own life, better economical challenges and so on, but nobody sees the end of it. It's true that they succeeded to create a government, the army and the civilian waiting for the elections. We'll wait and see, it's not that easy. But still, the terrorism is there. I mean, they didn't invent a situation that they come into a vacuum and they start from the beginning. The population suffered a lot from terrorism. The junction of Sudan at that part of the world needs to see what they're going to do. Of course, some of you mentioned the issue of money and budgeting the terrorism, which is a big deal. And if countries like Qatar are still trying to be part of the future of Sudan by investment, by building a new port in Port Sudan, and so on, that means that more money will go for terrorism. If Turkey is involved in Sudan, and it is, in all kind of project and pumping money into it, that means that the military elite in Sudan may use this money and go on with their old habits of working together with terrorism against the population, while thinking about the wish of the countries around, not only Egypt and other countries, but also Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and other countries, or the Gulf states. That means the stability of Sudan is extremely important to them. That means that they will do anything in order to keep it, to preserve it, and even if it said they would like less the rights of the domestic population. That means that the money not necessarily will go to projects to make the economy more healthy or to promote all kind of projects for the population. So we need to wait and see. At the moment, I would say, the struggle with terrorism in that part of the world, it's going on the same path. It's not that anybody succeeded to defeat the terrorism. The radical changes and the development in the Middle East and Africa, making it very, very delicate, the issue of controlling, fighting, and trying to go into the swamp of terrorism and really succeed to deny it. That is very, very difficult. So it's a process that it will take a long time. Now, cooperation between governments, it's necessary, more than we facing today. And if you can, and we all know that Boko Haram, for example, trying to get into, we know about Chad, we know about Republic of Central Africa. I don't know how much you can prevent them going outside of Nigeria and how effective are they, what connections that they have with other groups, but definitely they're still there in a way. So with all your good work that you're doing, but you still need somebody with a different identity, a different country, a different tribe, that he has an interest to stop them and to create the interest to stop them. That is a big challenge. Now, I don't see Sudan in coming months succeeding, really changing its policy towards terrorism. It will take a lot of time. Even if they redefine the goals against terrorism, it doesn't mean necessarily that the success will come in 2 days. It's, as you know, it's a long process, it's a big work, very massive attention, energy to put not only money on that, and cooperation between countries. Now, at least we can see that in that part of the world, Egypt, South Sudan, maybe Sudan now, Kenya is trying to do its best, Ethiopia now with a new prime minister who is very active, and we all hope that if you succeed in that part more in Eastern Africa, not necessarily in your part, succeed to create kind of mechanism that will understand and trying to build something that stop, at least in the very basic, element, this terrorism, that will be a very good start point for the coming future. Thank you very much.